What's your view on that sequence of events?
What makes this slightly problematic is that at the time when Trevor Mallard first heard the remark, he described it as I think a very sexist remark or something like that in the House. And Jerry Brownlee, and he demanded that it be withdrawn and apologised for, and sort of everyone sort of sat and looked at each other, and Jerry Brownlee stood up as the leader of the House for National, stood up and said, well, could you please tell us what the remark was, so we can know what to withdraw and apologise for. And Trevor Mallard said, well, I'm not going to repeat it here, I'm not going to repeat it in the House. So at that point, Mallard, didn't reveal it.
Yeah.
Later, it appears, or at least it's been alleged, that he then told the media what it was. And one reading of that, and I think this is the reading that National has put on it, is that essentially he was trying to embarrass National, or the MP responsible, to actually, fess up and actually apologise.
Right.
And that, I think, is, probably not on if that's what he was trying to achieve.
Paula Bennett walked out of the House yesterday after being frustrated with his rulings, and today she was told to leave after a prolonged argument between the Speaker and several National MPs. The situation's turned a bit serious, actually.
Well, yeah, I mean, they've decided to up the ante a little bit. What underlying all of this is a bunch of things. First of all, the role of the Speaker is a particularly strange one, because they're meant to be the kind of neutral, unbiased overseer of what happens in the House, but they're also a political party MP. And in Trevor Mallard's case, a Labour Party MP with kind of a long background, and, he's a Labour guy through and through in some ways. So that makes the Speaker's role always very difficult, because anything they do can be portrayed as being, oh, you're just favouring your side over us, you'd have got it in for us. And so if the opposition thinks that, all they can do about it really is just try to make as much noise about it as possible to try to, influence the ref, as it were, to change behaviour and do things that they feel will be more favourable for them. And that's really what we're seeing here. It's the equivalent of a captain in a rugby team going up to the ref after a penalty and, ref, you really need to think about how you're doing this. You're only reffing for one side type thing.
Hence, Jerry Brownlee gave Trevor Mallard until 2 o'clock today to respond. And sure. he raised a point of order at question time, but I don't think Trevor Mallard did respond. Nope. Is the whole matter one, though, to which the Speaker should assiduously respond, that letter of complaint?
No, frankly, it would have been, that's a little bit of brinkmanship, right? It's kind of try to push the Speaker to see, can we get him to cave? And frankly, the Speaker's not going to cave to that, because otherwise, any party could, push the Speaker and push the Speaker around. So the Speaker does have to show, I'm not going to be, bullied, in a sense, into one way or the other. So there's a sort of a dance goes on where, pressure is brought by the opposition to try to get the Speaker to change. The Speaker has to show, well, I'm not going to be a pushabout. I'm not going to be, able to be bullied into doing things. And then behind the scenes, no doubt, this frantic sort of discussion about how exactly we're going to bring this to some sort of civilised conclusion. All
right, Andrew, thank you very much. Last word from you.
I was just going to say, what about the issue of the Speaker deducting questions for bad behaviour? It's almost like, 10 points from Gryffindor or 10 points from Slytherin.
Yeah, that's right.
Is that very useful in facilitating democracy?
It'll be interesting to see if that gets a rethink.
It would make a great game show.
Yeah.
That's what I'm thinking.
Andrew Clay on the panel today. Thank you, Andrew.
Always a pleasure,
Jim.
Jim.
To see you. And Nadine Higgins, thanks for coming in,
Nadine.
Nadine.
Thanks for having me.
And now Checkpoint.
Tō te mara I hoa mā he kōrero, kei te haere he kaupapa, kei te karawhiua. Welcome to Checkpoint, everyone. Tonight on the programme, the South Canterbury share milker whose actions led to MPI first being alerted to Mycoplasma bovis in July last year tells us she's now living in a caravan in Australia after being asked to leave the Van Leeuwen farm, unable to find employment and yet to receive compensation. A special panel recommends a pay rise for nurses, but will it be enough to stop them walking off the job? Also tonight, a rural midwife says she's already spent $11,000 on petrol this year and may have to consider her future if prices continue to rise. The political hijinks continue. Paula Bennett, yesterday she walked, today she was thrown. And last night, Zach Fleming went kiwifruit packing. Tonight, he's in the pack house.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon. Ko Katrina Bat in Aho. Air New Zealand has filed court proceedings against BP and Z Energy for damages caused by last year's fuel pipeline rupture north of Auckland. The rupture caused fuel shortages and hit airlines hard as the pipe carries nearly all of Auckland's aviation fuel to the airport. Sally Murphy reports.
The fuel pipeline, owned by Refining NZ, which runs from the Bastion Point refinery to Wiri in South Auckland, ruptured last September. An investigation found the pipe was weakened after it was scraped by a digger in the 3 years leading up to the breach. Z Energy says it has received a statement of claim from Air New Zealand Limited for $4.3 million for the cut in supply. The company says it will defend the proceedings and refutes all claims. BP says it will also dispute the claims. This is Sally Murphy.
The Nurses Union says a recommendation to increase their pay by 3% next month doesn't go far enough. Today, a panel recommended a 3% pay increase for nurses from June, with the same rise again in August this year. There'd also be another 3% increase in August next year, as well as an immediate one-off $2,000 payment to avoid strike action. C. Payne from the Nurses Organisation says the recommendations won't help them bring them in line with teachers' pay.
We don't think that's going to solve the problem. It's not going to bring us to parity with teachers until on their current pay rate till August 2019.
C. Payne says the Nurses Union will be waiting until the district health boards make an updated offer to nurses next Monday before deciding on any strike action. The Ministry for Primary Industries is defending its decision not to prosecute any of the big fishing companies found to be underreporting their catches of Hoki. A 2011 report leaked to RNZ News shows companies including Sanford and Tallies were underreporting hundreds of tonnes of the fish and making it vulnerable to being overfished. But Gary Orr from the Ministry says instead of court action, it was decided talking to the companies would be more productive.
I take great pride in what we did. We actually made a difference, and we did it without having to take a significant resource out of our enforcement group by running a prosecution.
Gary Orr says within a year he was assured the big companies had changed their ways and there was no longer a risk of Hoki being overfished. There have been testy scenes at Parliament this afternoon during question time, with National's deputy leader thrown out of the House. The National Party issued a furious letter to Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard with a deadline of 2 o'clock this afternoon, demanding he explain why he told media one of their MPs had made a sexist remark about the Prime Minister in Parliament. Mr Mallard hasn't yet responded. Today, Paula Bennett was told to leave the House for interjecting and for questioning the Speaker about why she was made to apologise after storming out yesterday. Afterwards, Mrs Bennett relayed that she's disappointed in the way the Speaker behaved, but admits that's sometimes the reality of politics.
Oh well, these things happen. You know, if you can't take it, then don't give it. So that's the way things go, and he's completely within his rights as Speaker to demand that I leave. I felt it was unnecessary. I didn't think it was over a big deal.
Paula Bennett. Ski fields in the Queenstown Lakes District are predicting a bumper season following overnight snowfall. Snow-closed roads caused cancellations and delays to flights and led to schools opening late in Queenstown. But it also brought between 15 and 40 centimetres of powder to ski fields in the area. Coronet Peak Ski Area Manager Nigel Kerr says the snowfall has made for a spectacular scenes on the mountain.
About 4 o'clock, a front came in, which wasn't unexpected, but it dumped somewhere between 15 and 40 centimetres across the mountain. The reality is we're looking at an amazing winter wonderland out my window right now.
Nigel Kerr says it's a positive omen for the winter ahead, as long-time staff of the ski field can't remember such consistent snowfall and cold temperatures in May during their time working there. The Remarkables will open on June the 9th with Coronet Peak and Cardrona following a week later. The Crown Range will remain closed overnight due to freezing conditions and more snow forecast in the area. The Queenstown Lakes District Council closed the road which links Queenstown and Wanaka this morning after snow blanketed the Wakatipu Basin and freezing conditions made driving the road dangerous. Motorists are able to travel between Queenstown and Wanaka via the Cromwell Gorge. It's 5 minutes past 5. Sport, the new Breakers coach Kevin Braswell says shooting guard Corey Webster will return to the Auckland-based basketball club, a reformed man. Webster's signed a 3-year contract with the club. He's twice left previously, both times under a cloud of controversy. But Braswell says the 28-year-old Webster has done a lot of growing up since leaving the Breakers early last year and has been playing in Israel and China.
He's been away for almost a year by himself. I think he's in China right now. So, it's a lot of time you spend, and I've been in that position before where I've traveled Europe by myself, and I've made mistakes when I was younger. But, you get a lot of time to think to yourself about the mistakes that you've made, and I think coming back, he'll show people that he's another Corey Webster.
Kevin Braswell. All Blacks Ben Smith, Luke Whitelock, Shannon Frizzell and Liam Coltman have all been left out of the Highlanders side to play the Queensland Reds in Brisbane on Saturday night. However, Waisake Naholo will start in his usual right-wing spot, while Liam Squire returns from an early season knee injury and is joined on the bench by fellow All Black Aaron Smith. Meanwhile, the Wallabies prop and Queensland Reds skipper James Slipper has been suspended by Rugby Australia for 2 months for testing positive for cocaine. It's Slipper's second positive test, and Rugby Australia's Chief Executive Raylene Castle says while she knows Slipper's been experiencing personal difficulties, there's no place for illicit drugs in sport. That's the news.
Farming? It's National Lamb Day today, is it?
It is.
Well, happy National Lamb Day.
Thank you, Guyan. Raise a chop to the industry today.
Fishing? Having the milling machines on board, is that a way of hiding tons of juvenile fish that have been caught?
No, it is not a way of hiding anything.
Furore?
Speaking to the point of order.
No, there's no point of order. If the member wants a further supplementary, she can take it. If not, we'll move on.
I'm leaving. What a waste.
For how long?
Stay tuned to Morning Report with Guyan Espiner and Susie Ferguson, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Hawaii's lava chaser on photographing Kilauea's eruptions, fissures and lava bombs. And after 10, the former president of Kiribati on saving his sinking island nation from climate change. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow. Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Fine spells, a few heavy showers, mainly about the ranges. Westerly gales easing overnight. For the remainder of the North Island, showers spreading northwards today, some heavy and squally with hail and isolated thunderstorms. Nelson Buller, Westland and Northern Fiordland, heavy, squally showers with hail above Heavy, squally showers with hail and isolated thunderstorms, snow above 600 metres but heavy falls above 400 metres south of Haast, all clearing tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury fine today, apart from a few showers about the high country with snow above 600 metres. Showers spreading to the Canterbury Plains and coastal Marlborough tomorrow. Otago, Southland and southern Fiordland. Showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms and snow above 500 metres. Showers retreating to coastal Southland this evening but spreading elsewhere again tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, periods of rain possibly heavy. It's just gone 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thank you everyone for joining us. Coming up on the program, nurses and their pay and petrol and your pay, really. But first, with a government response to Mycoplasma bovis to be announced on Monday, and with Gypsy Day a week tomorrow, on which large numbers of stock are traditionally moved for reasons like winter feeding. Tonight we have the first broadcast interview with the share milker whose concern for the welfare of her cows eventually led to the discovery of the bacteria. Her name is Mary Potita, and she and her husband Sorrel were, share milking for the Van Leeuwen Dairy Company in South Canterbury. Concerned about their cows, they contacted a local vet, Merlin Hay, and the three of them, Mary, Sorrel and Merlin, began a process of questioning, testing and taking samples that led to Massey University discovering Mycoplasma bovis and the alarm being raised with MPI. Without them, it's hard to say how much further the disease might have spread before detection. Now, Merlin Hay is still working as a highly regarded vet, but for Mary and Sorrel, they've lost their home, their income and potentially everything they own. Yet to receive compensation for their losses, asked to leave the farm, unable to find other employment, they've moved to Australia for low-paid farm work, leaving their tractors and equipment in New Zealand. We spoke to Mary Poteta about finding bovis, about what happened next, and a warning that some listeners may find some of what Mary says about the disease disturbing.
May 2017, we dried off about 352 cows send them off to the paddock. middle June, we brought them back in again, and we started noticing some of the cows have started springing. Now, springing, they're not supposed to be springing. Springing means they're going to calve within the next week or so. This was strange, and when I touched the udder, it sounded rubber, but it really looked like she was full of milk. So Sorrel, my husband, he's a fanatic about health, and when he pulled the teat, the one udder, it looked like butter, like milk, and the cow didn't like it. She kicked you. She really kicked you. She went mad when you pulled on her teeth. We took some samples because by that time I found about 162 cows with this problem out of the 352 odd cows. So we drafted them, separated them, took some samples to the vet because we didn't know what kind of mastitis this could be. So the vet's Merlin Hay, she's our vet, she sent the samples away and it came back as nothing wrong with it. No cultures, nothing wrong with it. And we couldn't understand this. We told the Van Leeuwens, look, we've got all these cows, there's something wrong. But they said it was due down to management. So Sorrel got a bit upset about it. And he said to the vet, he said to Merlin, please come in and check this. In the meantime, some of the cows started getting arthritis. We had about 62 cows with arthritis in their front legs on the joints. They could hardly step onto it. You can give them any anti-inflammatory. It will help for about 10 minutes. Then she can't walk on it. Merlin, our vet, asked for one of the cows to be culled, and she did an autopsy on the leg. It was severe arthritis. She also sent some of the liquids away to Massey, and also the samples, milk. Because there was no culture in it, she also sent that to Massey for them to investigate further. By then, this was in July already. By middle of July, we were told we've got Mycoplasma bovis.
And what was the reaction from the farmer you were working for?
Well, he said it was down to management. We didn't do it properly. We're dying off cows. And he said it was due to management.
So the symptoms that you were experiencing and that you were really concerned about, and in the case of mastitis, which you seem to see in about a half of that particular herd, you were told by the farmer was a result of poor care by you?
Yes. If you put it down to normal words, yes. We weren't doing our job properly.
And what was the response when you learnt formally through testing that it was Mycoplasma bovis?
Well, we didn't know what it was. It's the first time we ever heard that word. Sorrel, of course, quickly, he's got all these vet books, and he quickly looked it up, and when we heard what it was and how bad it was, we were shocked. We were like, why? Why us, why? By that time, we had about 8 herds running around the farm. The milkers, the first herd, milkers, the second herd, the sick cows, the normal mastitis cows, then you had the suspect cows, the ones that have got Mycoplasma, and then you've got the dry cows and also the springers. So, yes, by that time, our milk production also started dropping. I mean, by June, we were 83% ahead of production that farm has ever done. But by July, our milk started dropping. By August, we were told to start making some staff redundant. We wouldn't be able to pay them. This wasn't in my budget. This redundancy package was not in my budget. We've got a lot of machinery on that farm. We still got 3 tractors, 140-plus horsepower tractors, mixer wagons, silage wagons, and 13 tows, anything to make our work easier. By the time we paid the staff the redundancy pay, that was fine, but the MPR won't refund you for that. Then, of course, the milk started dropping even more. The way we were, taking cows out, we couldn't milk them. Milk started dropping even more.
So as the share milkers, and forgive such a towny question, Mary, but as the share milkers, you employ people, you run the business, you operate, you bring your own machinery in, for example, the tractors you were talking about.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Staff is my problem. Machinery is our problem. As share milkers, that's all our problem. Machinery, staff, petrol, diesel, electricity, and rubberware.
So when did you stop earning income?
by end of November, I'd stopped. Because we got our last milk check for November, which wasn't a big one, and that was the last money I received.
And what are you living on now?
My credit card. I think the banks aren't going to be happy to hear this, but yes, we're living on our credit card.
And where are you living now, Mary?
We're in Victoria, in Sale, in Australia. We had to get off the farm, and we got a letter saying that we must vacate the farm by April. So by March, we had a job offer here in Australia, because in New Zealand, that time of the year, you don't find a job. For share milkers, you don't find jobs in the middle of March. And since then, I bought a caravan on my credit card. I bought a car on my credit card, and we just went for interviews. Travelled from Western Australia to Victoria just for interviews. We just went for interviews. And I can say we did find a job, a position, but it only starts the end of June.
I'm just reading in the New Zealand Herald, Mr. Van Leeuwen talking about how devastating it's been for the Van Leeuwen Dairy Group. He's quoted as saying, "We are struggling at the moment because we notified the disease we are eligible for compensation, but it's a battle, it's not coming through." When it does come through, if it hasn't already, would you expect that some of it would be shared with you?
Well, yes, of course. 22% of the milk production that we would have done must come to us.
Have you received any of that compensation? Have you received what you believe you are entitled to?
Nothing. Joe, nothing. They're going to have to, if NPR doesn't pay up soon, I'll have to declare myself bankrupt.
Mary, I want to go back to your concern, alarm over the condition of the cows. You said roughly half that herd of 350 had what sounds like chronic mastitis, and you were being told by your employer that it was because you were not caring for the cows well enough. If you had not persevered and kept saying there is something wrong here, what is it, do you think that Mycoplasma bovis would have been detected on that farm?
No. Now, if it wasn't for Sorrel and for Merlin, the vet, I don't think it would have ever come out. And the only reason it did come out was because there were so many cows. I mean, if it was only a few cows, you wouldn't even think about it. I mean, we didn't even know it exists. You wouldn't think about it. If they don't want to clear up, you send them to the works. That's it. But this was just too many cows.
Where did the cows go?
Well, the cows stayed on the farm until NPR gave us permission. Okay, the cows will all be cold. So everything was cold. By the 2nd of December, I had no more cows on the farm.
So they were being culled at the works, were they?
Yes. They were culled at the works, but my calves is another story, John. It's really sad for me. I was getting newborn calves by then. The cows had started calving by end of July. And the works wouldn't take the calves, or pet food usually would help us that way, because we calve 4 times a year. They take the bulls in it, the cows, the calves that the Danians don't want, they take away for meatworks. But this time, pet food had to come, shoot the calves in the pens, and then I'd go back the next day and there'd be blood all over. And there's still calves alive, because they were only allowed to take so many a day. I did complain about this because I couldn't go near the calves because I saw all the blood in it. Then the next day, the pet food come again, shoot the calves, slit their throats. Their throats must be slit, NPR said. And then Sorrel sometimes would have to go help them load the dead calves, so it's affected him quite badly as well.
Who was shooting them, Mary? Sorry, forgive my ignorance. Who was shooting the calves and slitting their throats?
Pet food. That's the only people that could take the calves, because the works weren't geared up to take small calves.
Mary Poteta. So Mary, her husband Sorrel, and then the local vet Merlin Hay were the people who went, something is not right here. They tested for mastitis. It wasn't typical mastitis, and they pushed and pushed and pushed. Eventually, of course, the rest is history. MPI raised the alarm, and a response, which we will see finalised from the government on Monday, began. MPI has not responded to our request for an interview or for a statement. We do hope to hear from them before the end of the program. In fact, they are going to be live after the 6 o'clock news, so we're delighted to say that we will hear from MPI after the 6 o'clock news. The Van Lewins, who owned the South Canterbury farm where Merrill and Sorrel were share milkers, have not returned our calls today or responded to questions we emailed. We do hope to hear from them too. 20 minutes past 5. A special panel has recommended a pay rise for nurses, which accumulates to more than 9% over the next 2 years. But it might not be enough to prevent them walking off the job. The panel working to resolve the pay dispute between nurses and district health boards, DHB, says nurses should first get a 3% pay rise from next month, as well as a $2,000 one-off payment, followed by further pay rises over the next 2 years. But as Anita Blake-Person reports, it may not be enough to stop 27,000 nurses from striking.
Overworked and underpaid, nurses say they're struggling through their shifts, and without change, thousands will walk off the job next month. After rejecting a DHB offer of a 2% pay increase in March, the Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern recommended an independent panel work to help resolve the issues. Today, it released its recommendations. Its chair, Margaret Wilson, says most of the feedback it received was around nurses' huge workload, so along with the pay rise, it has suggested a 2% boost in nursing staff.
We felt that if you didn't actually address that issue, then just addressing remuneration issues wasn't really going to solve the problem. So the panel, I suppose, took a structural approach by saying what's the real issue here, and also an approach to obviously address the remuneration as well.
The pay recommendations include 3 lots of 3% pay increases, one from next month, another in August, and a third one next year, which would equate to an overall pay increase of more than 9% in the next 2 years. But the Nurses Organisation spokesperson C. Payne says that falls short of what's needed.
And it sounds good, but, we were in bargaining for quite a long time, and at one point we had a 2, 2 and 2 over 3 years. Our members clearly didn't want that. They've been very clear that 2-year term they're not wanting to go beyond that. And so 3, 3 and 3 is effectively just a 1% more additional increase. We don't think that's going to solve the problem.
C. Payne won't say whether the strike will go ahead until the DHB considers the panel's recommendations and makes their offer on Monday. She says the recommendation to increase staff, which works out to be about 600 full-time nursing positions, shows the pressure they're under.
That's good recognition, but if you don't fix the pay at the same time, how do you attract people to stay in the industry? How do you attract people to come to New Zealand and work here? And so I think the two for us have always gone hand in hand as problems.
The Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern says she's glad the panel has recognised nurses' struggles.
I absolutely hope that we'll be able to find resolution, that we will be able to meet some of the needs of our nursing workforce, which of course means also making sure it's a safe environment for them to work in.
But she's not willing to comment on the pay offer while negotiations are still underway.
DHBs are sitting down now, giving real consideration to what the panel has said. And of course, nurse safety should be really top of mind for all of us. Everyone wants to go to work and make sure they're working in a safe environment. And certainly what the panel is drawing out, that for some nurses that might not be the case.
A poll asking 27,000 nurses whether they support strike action is due to close tomorrow. Those results will be known on Monday morning, with the DHBs expected to make their updated offer to nurses in the afternoon. The nursing union will then consult with its members before deciding on whether to proceed with strike action, which would take place in July. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Anita Blake-Person, aho.
We're going to stay with health and money, but change the focus somewhat. A rural midwife says she spent several $1,000s on petrol in the last year and faces a bigger bill this year as fuel prices skyrocket. The cost of fuel has hit a record high in some parts of the country. In Wanaka, of course, it's hit $2.45 a litre. But there are warnings the worst is yet to come. Jessie Chang reports.
$11,000. That's how much Jan Sherp spent on petrol last year, and the fuel bill keeps climbing as prices push new limits. The Central Otago rural midwife says the closest base hospital is a 2-hour drive away, and most clients are at least an hour away by car. On average, she clocks up nearly 80,000 kilometres a year doing her job.
If I've got weeks where I'm not having birth, then my income is much less, but I have to be able to put fuel in my car to get to do my job. So some weeks I spend more on fuel than I earn.
Fellow midwife Charlie Ferris, who also works in the Queenstown Lakes area, says some weeks she has to spend $250 on petrol.
I actually put half a tank in this morning at the petrol station. I think it was about $2.46 a litre. It's a huge concern, I think, for all self-employed people that they have to meet that cost, and it's not like we can set our rates to reflect that cost all the time.
And there may be no relief in sight for people who rely on their cars for work. The petrol company GAL says the fallout from the US pulling out of the Iran nuclear deal, US trade sanctions, and the low New Zealand dollar have all affected the cost of fuel. Its pricing analyst Rohan Mehta says if international market prices keep rising, New Zealanders could soon be shelling out $3 a litre for petrol.
A $3 would probably be conceivable if we see, the markets just going up and up, like international markets.
The managing director of Baggery Economics, Cameron Baggery, says anything is possible if the geopolitical climate continues to be unstable and the dollar continues to drop. But the other side of the story is that it's a win for exporters.
A lot of what's driving the domestic price of petrol here in New Zealand at the moment has just been outright swings in the currency. That's not great for consumers, but it's certainly a good news story for the export side of the equation.
For most people, though, that's not welcome news. In Nelson, where unleaded 91 was $2.30 today, locals say they wouldn't be impressed if petrol prices continue to rise.
I was just in Melbourne and it was like less than $2.
Well, we've all got to still drive, haven't we? So, I suppose we'll still pay it, but yeah, it's getting ridiculous.
Long story short, it's just going to get higher and higher eventually. You'll find different ways of transporting people.
And for midwife Jan Sherp, she says rising fuel prices could force her to cut back on her travels.
I would seriously have to consider how I provide my care. I would then would need to consider doing all of my antenatal care into a clinic as opposed to going to any of my clients' houses.
For Checkpoint, Cordesi Chang Tierney.
It's 27 minutes past 5. National's Deputy Leader Paula Bennett today earned the dubious honour of being the first MP to be thrown out of the debating chamber by Speaker Trevor Mallard. It happened during a particularly testy old session in Parliament driven by National Party MPs who are furious with the way Mr Mallard has been running question time. They were also upset about his role in a story about an alleged sexist remark about the Prime Minister made in the debating chamber. This is a sequel, of course, to yesterday's events. Our Deputy Political Editor, Chris Bramwell, was in Parliament as the sparks, putting it politely, flew.
Paula Bennett will leave the chamber. The member will leave the chamber.
Yesterday, National MP Paula Bennett stormed out of the chamber herself, but today it was Trevor Mallard who sent her on her way.
Oh well, these things happen. If you can't take it, then don't give it. So that's the way things go, and he's completely within his rights as Speaker to demand that I leave. I felt it was unnecessary. I didn't think it was over a big deal.
Today's question time was always going to be fiery. It's the end of a 4-week sitting session before a 2-week break, but also because National had set 2 p.m. as a deadline for the Speaker to respond to a furious letter written by Jerry Brownlee. When the House sat, it quickly became clear Trevor Mallard had no intention of responding, which set off a series of points of order with Mr Brownlee barely containing his frustration. He asked the Speaker to explain his role in alleging a National MP called the Prime Minister a stupid little girl.
Quite clearly, a Speaker briefing the media on a matter that is critical of the opposition, particularly when all those who could have made the statement have made it clear they did not, when many who have listened to the tapes and considered the transcript cannot find evidence of it ever being said, with the only person left who claims to have heard it being the Speaker.
The Leader of the House, Chris Hipkins, told Parliament it was not up to the Speaker to respond in the House and it could be talked about outside. But Jerry Brownlee wasn't having a bar of that.
The member might like to say, well, raising this creates a degree of disorder. Let me tell you that the degree of disorder has well and truly been created by the way in which that particular statement has found its way into the media.
Once questions got underway, it became clear that National MPs were being deliberately rowdy. Here's what it sounded like from the Parliamentary Press Gallery.
We don't think it works, and I remind the member of
Trevor Mallard kept his cool for as long as he could, but National MP David Bennett was the one who finally tipped him over the edge when he interrupted a minister.
Point of order. No, I'm not having a point of order, Mr Bennett. You're either going to withdraw and apologise or I will name you. Order.
Naming an MP is a severe punishment, which has only been used in New Zealand's Parliament a very small number of times.
Withdraw and apologise. Thank you.
The disorder continued for the rest of question time, with MPs on both sides of the House being told to withdraw and apologise, including for making animal noises.
Matt King will withdraw and apologise.
I did nothing. I said nothing. What did I say?
Order.
Withdraw and apologise.
The member will resume his seat. The member, sorry, Mr Bennett, will withdraw and apologise again. Point of order. No, the member will... Noises that might be more commonly heard in a barnyard are not appropriate.
How is...
And what for? Why do I withdraw and apologise?
Sorry?
Why do I withdraw and apologise, Mr Speaker?
Why?
Yes.
Because the member made an unparliamentary...
The House is now on recess for 2 weeks, after which the Speaker will be hoping all MPs return rested and perhaps a bit better behaved. Atu I te whare pāri mata mō te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko Chris Bramall aho.
You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up on the program, last night we had Zach Fleming kiwifruit picking in the Bay of Plenty. Extraordinary response to that. Well, tonight Zach is kiwifruit packing. So he's gone from the not terribly great outdoors into the indoors. How's he going to find it? That's coming up. MPI says it didn't prosecute any of the big fishing companies for underreporting catches of hoki because court action doesn't help. And has winter finally arrived? We'd love your feedback on bovis nurses and their pay, rising petrol prices and anything. You can text us on 2101, as you know, if you are a regular listener, bless you. And you can tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, email checkpoint@radionz.co.nz, or send an old-fashioned letter, as some of you do, rather wonderfully, with spirally hand, normally saying, "Don't say bad language on the radio, John Campbell." But before any of it, here's Katrina Batten with the headlines.
You never say bad language on the radio,
Quite
do you,
often, actually, Katrina.
Z Energy and BP are promising to fight court action by Air New Zealand for damages caused by last year's rupture of the fuel pipeline between Bastion Point and Wiri. An investigation found the pipe was weakened after earlier being scraped by a digger. Z says it's received a statement of claim from Air New Zealand Limited for $4.3 million for the cut in supply. BP says it will also dispute the claims. The Nurses Union says a recommended pay increase still won't help bring their pay up with that of teachers. A panel has recommended a 3% rise for nurses next month and again in August, with a further 3% in August next year. C. Payne says the union will wait to see what the DHBs do before deciding on any strike action. None of the big fishing companies found to be underreporting their catches of hoki were prosecuted because the Ministry for Primary Industries decided talking to them would be more productive. A 2011 report leaked to RNZ News shows companies including Sanford and Tallies were underreporting hundreds of tonnes of the fish and making it vulnerable to being overfished. National's Deputy Leader Paula Bennett is philosophical about being thrown out of Parliament today. The National Party issued a furious letter to Parliament Speaker Trevor Mallard demanding he explain why he told media one of their MPs had made a sexist remark about the Prime Minister in Parliament. Mr Mallard hasn't yet responded. Ms Bennett says Mr Mallard was quite within his rights, but she felt it was unnecessary and not a big deal. Ski fields in the Queenstown Lakes District are predicting a bumper season following overnight snow. Roads were closed and flights delayed, but the snow also brought 15 to 40 centimetres of powder to ski fields in the area. Those are the headlines. Back at 6.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten. I asked people to tweet us, and Paul has texted. Tweet. Excellent. I think that's dad humour, Paul, but I enjoyed it. Let's turn to business news now with Emile Donovan. Emile, hello. Some new trade numbers in today, and the country's back in the black.
That's right, John, and they're back in the black to the tune of over $260 million, actually. And how is this for serendipity? It was largely a boost in kiwifruit sales that got us there.
Is that serendipity? Serendipity is when you look for one thing and you find something better I think.
I thought that serendipity was poetic truth, a poetic situation. Anyway, you're getting me off track, John.
No, but whatever it is, it's good, right?
Yes. So pat on the back for Zach Fleming anyway, he did his part.
Yeah, someone with a PhD in English will now text us what serendipity is. But anyway, whatever it is, yeah, thanks, Emil.
Anyway, so these are the figures for the month of April. Exports were just over $5 billion. That's the second highest level ever for any month. Kiwifruit did one better. It actually hit its highest monthly figure ever. So we sold $438 million worth of the stuff, and lamb and dairy also chipped in. Imports rose too, that's unsurprising. They rose to $4.8 billion. That's largely because of the amount of petrol and its associated products that we imported and the rising cost of that as we've been over. We also imported a bunch more vehicles and vehicle-related stuff, talking accessories and car parts and whatnot, and quite a bit of machinery and manufacturing equipment as well.
Excellent use of the word whatnot there. A disappointing year for Metro Performance Glass, but the market's keeping face. It's a funny old one. Sometimes the market punishes people with odd results. Here it's said, we're sticking with you, right?
That's right, yeah, it's a strange one. So Metro Performance did make a net profit, so we should get that out in the open first of all. They made a profit of just over $16 million in the year to March. So that sounds good, obviously, but that's 16% lower than it was last year, so not the best performance for the past financial year. That was signalled well in advance, though, so it wasn't a huge surprise to shareholders. Really, I mean, you know, this can kind of be put down to growing pains. The company has expanded really fast, and that maybe wasn't managed as well as it could have been. They had high staff turnover, and their chief executive, Nigel Rigby, left the business in March as well, which always brings a bit of instability. They also had to deal with softer sales both here and in Australia, and that's likely to continue, the company says. But speaking to shareholders today, they really stuck to their line that they've cleaned out the closet and they're back on track. They're projecting underlying profit of $30 to $33 million next year. And they should be getting close by now to appointing a new chief executive. As we said, Nigel Rigby left in March, so that has been a long, they've been looking for quite some time. It seems as though they've been quite exacting and looking for the right candidate. And it looks, as we say, like the market is confident that they can actually do that. The shares rose by a touch over 7%, so it'll be interesting to see whether that faith is rewarded.
Yeah, it will be. So they were up. What else happened on the markets?
Well, the NZX 50 was up 37 points. That's 0.3%. It ended on 8590. And the dollar is buying 69.2 US cents, 91.5 Australian, and 51.7 pence.
Emil Donovan, thank you very much. Sue Hobbs has emailed in serendipity, occurrence and development of events by chance in a happy or beneficial way. What a lovely word. Thank you, Sue. We return to Kiwifruit now, continuing on from our reporting last night about pickers and the difficult conditions and wages they face. Tonight, we move on to packing. The kiwifruit industry's self-described crisis has halved from 1,200 workers to now a shortage of about 600. But that's thanks largely to help from the media and MSD. The industry has few ideas on how to remedy the situation because it's dependent on foreigners, mainly backpackers. And after blaming, and I quote, welfare dependency for this crisis just a fortnight ago, Kiwifruit packing company Apata now admits actually its jobs are, and I quote, shit work. They're almost all paid the minimum wage. There's no work if it rains and no work for most of the year. Zach Fleming and our cameraman Nick Monroe paid a visit to one of Apata's pack houses to take a look for themselves.
That dull, constant drone of machinery is what these kiwifruit packers listen to for 10.5 hours a day, 8 a.m. till 7 p.m, with a half-hour break somewhere in the middle. Paid the minimum wage inside a windowless shed illuminated by fluorescent light. David Freeman, the communications manager for kiwifruit and avocado company Apata, describes the work in his own words as shit work for shit pay.
David, you said that this is shit work. Can you expand on that for me?
Well, it's pretty tough work. I've done it myself before, not for very long periods. It's just tough. It's really tough work, and you're doing the same thing over and over and over again. It's quite repetitive.
Quite repetitive's an understatement. The monotony rivals the worst. Almost all of the workers I spoke to said they hated it. But this belies Apata's statements a fortnight ago, begging for workers. Its managing director Stuart Weston said Kiwis need to toughen up. He blamed a benefit mentality for the Bay of Plenty's kiwifruit worker shortage.
We've got a systemic issue, multi-generational welfare dependency. This is not solved by asking a seasonal employer to throw them in a shed, work them hard, and wonder why they can't handle it.
But is it can't or just don't want to? More bluntly, the dichotomy is lazy dole bludgers or avoiding doing a shit job for shit pay. I went inside an Apata kiwifruit pack house to try and find out. Almost all of the jobs pay the minimum wage, $16.50 an hour. The forklift driver who loads crates onto conveyor belts. The separators who pick leaves and stems from the kiwifruit. The sorters who stand for hours watching tons of kiwifruit roll by, plucking out the imperfectly shaped fruit which we eat in New Zealand. We send the perfect fruit to Asia. And if there's a blemish, it goes in the bin. Hundreds of kilograms of fruit is chucked out each day, simply because we're too precious to eat slightly discoloured or disfigured fruit, despite it tasting the same. The woman who runs the sticker machine, she's on 25 cents more than the minimum wage, $16.75. The packers who pack 5,300 trays per hour, minimum wage. There is another commonality, most are foreigners, backpackers needing a cash injection. It's a very easy job to get.
Yeah, we just checked in and they were like, yeah, just come to the office and sign in. And we just came to the office, filled out some papers on the computer, and that was it, yeah.
And what, you started that day?
We started the day after that, so yeah. It was pretty
about
easy.
as easy as you can get, right?
Yeah, it was like the easiest job we get so far, yeah.
Juran, a 19-year-old from Germany, on his third day, says what makes it bearable is an end date.
Because I know that I'm not going to work here for the next 3 years, I want to work here for the next 2 weeks. So.
Off camera, some were as blunt as David Freeman. On camera, though, more diplomatic.
What do you think of it?
It's an experience.
Yeah?
I packed for just over 5 minutes. It felt like 20. Call me lazy, call me entitled, call me whatever you want. The simple fact is I'd rather do something else for the minimum wage. But Mr. Freeman doesn't believe money's a factor contributing to the worker shortage.
Not at all. Not at all. It's pretty simple. If we wanted to pay an extra $4 or $5 an hour and did that, we'd attract some workers very quickly, and then other pack houses would lift theirs. They'd go back to them. We would all end up with the same labour issue, and we would just be paying more for the labour.
Aren't most of the pack houses paying minimum wage though?
Yes, we are.
So if you all raised your wages, wouldn't you all attract more people and then therefore not have a labour shortage next year?
Look, it's too hard to say. I'm not a macroeconomist, so I can't say.
Since the extensive media coverage, Apata's filled all of its kiwifruit vacancies without raising wages. One of them was taken by Darcy, who's 81 years old.
I heard the plea that there were 1,200 staff short, and as I've worked here before, I thought I'd come back and help out.
What would you say to people who don't have a job at the moment, they live around here and they need one? Would you recommend this is a good thing to do?
Well, of course it is. You know, if you're not working, your quality of life is not good because you're only living on a benefit, and you certainly don't make money living on a benefit.
But clearly not many Kiwis think like Darcy, because remember, almost all of the people who work here are backpackers. It's likely we'll see a repeat of this next year. A shortage of packers will reach tourist message boards, and the jobs will be filled by transients. For Checkpoint, Zach Fleming.
Now, if you are involved in the kiwifruit industry at any level, from picker, packer to grower, we'd love to hear from you. Please email us, checkpoint@radionz.co.nz if you want to deal with us at length, or you can text us your number 2101 and we will call you. Speaking of texts, here's a wonderful one. Serendipity is digging for worms and finding gold. And that's kind of my understanding of it too. What a lovely definition. Thank you. You're on fire tonight. With your response to serendipity, and people delighted by the use of whatnot, someone saying it heralds a new era of relaxed RNZ. People less excited about the use of the word that begins with SH, but Right, coming up to 5:45. The Ministry for Primary Industry says it did not prosecute any of the big fishing companies for under-reporting catches of Hoki because court action doesn't help to change behaviour. A 2011 report leaked to RNZ shows companies including Sanford and Tallies were under-reporting hundreds of tonnes of the fish and making it vulnerable to being overfished. Hoki earned the country $230 million last year and is famously used in McDonald's fillet of fish burgers, or filet as they say at their restaurants. Here's our fisheries reporter, Conan Young.
Operation Bronto, that led to the discovery that all was not well in the Hoki fishery, was significant and took a year to complete, says MPI's head of compliance, Gary Orr.
We had fishery officers embarked on naval vessels at sea undertaking boarding and inspection. We had fishery officers in port that were inspecting product that was landed.
What it found was under-reporting of the amount of Hoki being caught, in one case an estimated 780 tonnes in a single season, and widespread deliberate targeting of the juvenile Hoki boats were supposed to avoid in order to allow fish stocks to replenish. There was even evidence of undersized Hoki being ground up in onboard mealing machines in order to hide evidence of the amount of small fish being caught. After gathering evidence, a report was written up along with 45 recommendations asking for further investigation of the offending and the placing of more ministry observers on boats to keep an eye on them. But what ended up happening was something quite different. Here's MPI's Gary Orr.
People have said, why didn't you prosecute? Well, we know from experience that prosecution will achieve behavioural change for maybe 4 years, 5 years at best. But if you want to achieve sustained behavioural change over a fleet of vessels operating in a fishery, you need to have a different method.
That different method? Talking to the companies involved.
We briefed quota holders and vessel captains, and then we sat down with individual companies and said, these are the behaviours we're seeing, these create a compliance risk. You need to change your behaviours. If you don't change those behaviours, then you're going to attract greater attention from us.
Gary Orr says within a year he was assured the big companies had changed their ways and there was no longer a risk of Hoki being overfished. How did he know this? While there had not been any follow-up operations of the size of Operation Bronto, ongoing audits of the industry provided him with the assurance he needed that fishers had not returned to their old habits. But Forest and Bird's Jeff Key said the decision not to prosecute was a cop-out.
The fisheries managers who managed the fishery on behalf of New Zealand were saying there was no evidence of discarding, while at the same time the compliance division of the same agency was uncovering significant offending.
Jeff Key says the report cast doubt on the Marine Stewardship Council's decision to certify the Hoki fishery as being sustainable.
We can't find any evidence that information about the potential scale of offending by the fishing industry was ever disclosed to the Marine Stewardship Council until about 2016. So for years this was kept hidden, and that's completely unacceptable.
So what does the industry have to say for itself? The head of Sanford, Volker Kunsch, says the offending named in the report is ancient history and not something his boat's engaged in now.
How unfortunate it is that we are digging something up that is 7 years, 8 years old, instead of focusing on what the big issues are in our marine space these days. I've been putting a lot of effort into turning Sanford's reputation into one where people feel we can actually trust this company.
The head of Tallies Nelson Division, Tony Hazlitt, says people enjoying a filet-o fish from McDonald's can be assured the Hoki in it has been caught sustainably.
We have been certified by MSC 3 times. We are open in our systems, and we are constantly looking at improvements in the management to our systems. We're constantly looking at ways to avoid juveniles, and it's a very healthy fishery at this point.
Asked about the fact the ministry's report had been kept secret for so long, the Minister of Fisheries, Stuart Nash, said he was encouraging MPI to be more transparent and to publish reports such as this online. For Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
Just before we move on with the time at 11 to 6, some breaking news. The Transport Minister has offered to resign after making a phone call on a domestic flight after the aircraft doors had shut. Phil Twyford says he apologises unreservedly for making the call and says it's particularly inappropriate given he is the Transport Minister. Mr Twyford says the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, didn't accept his resignation, but she did strip him of his responsibility for civil aviation, the Civil Aviation Authority. That role has been given to the Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter. We'll have more on this later in the programme. More than 2 months after she and her father were poisoned with a nerve agent, Yulia Skripal has spoken publicly for the first time, saying her life has been turned upside down. Yulia and her father, the former Russian spy Sergei Skripal, were poisoned with the military-grade nerve agent Novichok in the British city of Salisbury in March. It sparked a major diplomatic incident between Britain and Russia, of course. The BBC's Daniel Sanford reports.
After weeks of being at the centre of a huge diplomatic crisis, suddenly there she was. Yulia Skripal was poisoned with a nerve agent in Salisbury on March the 4th, but today she was well enough to read a prepared statement.
I still find it difficult to come to terms with the fact that both of us were attacked in such a way. The fact that a nerve agent was used to do this is shocking. We are so lucky to have both survived this attempted assassination. The clinical treatment was invasive, painful and depressing.
The police believe she and her father were poisoned by a Russian-designed Novichok nerve agent smeared on the door handle of his home. It led to surreal scenes in Salisbury as police and the army tried to control the contamination. And today it was clear that Yulia Skripal has been left with a scar on her neck from a tracheotomy.
My life has been turned upside down as I try to come to terms with the devastating changes, both physically and emotionally. I want to help care for my father until his full recovery. In the longer term, I hope to return home to my country.
Yulia Skripal prepared signed, handwritten copies of her statement in Russian and English, wanting to show that they were her words. The Russian ambassador has repeatedly suggested that she might be being held against her will and demanded access to her.
I am grateful for the offers of assistance from the Russian embassy, but at the moment I don't wish to avail myself of their services. Also, I want to reiterate what I said in my earlier statement, that no one speaks for me or for my father but ourselves.
While Yulia Skripal was in a coma, dozens of diplomats were expelled from Britain, the United States and Europe. Russia retaliated in kind as the crisis grew. She's a Russian citizen who lived in Russia, where her father is regarded as a traitor. And tonight, it's still unclear where they will live next.
That report from the BBC. Let's head to the south of New Zealand now. Parts of the south people are really feeling the effects of a polar blast. Queenstown and surrounding areas have experienced freezing temperatures, icy roads and plenty of snow on the ground. But to, well, that hardy bunch, it's good news for many of them and marks the beginning of the best time of year. Our Otago Southern reporter Timothy Brown has the story.
Snow on the ground, snow on the roads. You always get a bit of variation within the basin, but pretty much snow everywhere, snow on the hills. The weather's started to lift again now, planes are flying and we can see the peaks and it's very beautiful.
Wakatipu High School principal Steve Hall describes the scene that greeted Queenstown residents when they woke up this morning. The school and all others in the area had a delayed start to the day due to the snowfall. But far from causing concern, Steve Hall says the locals, many of them winter sports enthusiasts, love a snow day.
Plenty of enthusiasts amongst the pupils and the staff.
Right, okay, so fingers crossed for a few snow days down the line.
Yeah, no one gets too unhappy about snow days down here, that's for sure.
And those preparing the mountains for the coming ski season are also smiling broadly. Coronet Peak's ski area manager, Nigel Kerr, says all predictions are for a bumper season.
About 4 o'clock a front came in, which wasn't unexpected, but it dumped somewhere between 15 and 40 centimetres across the mountain. The reality is we're looking at an amazing winter wonderland out my window right now.
Nigel Kerr says long-time staff can't remember a season beginning quite like this.
Talking to Ants, one of our maintenance guys, who's been here since '96, and he was saying he can't really remember seeing this just consistent snow coming in and the depth that's building up in May in his time. I mean, it's looking like an absolutely stunning winter ahead.
The Remarkables will open on June the 9th, with Coronet Peak and Cadrona following a week later. But Jimmy Sygrove from the Queenstown Lakes District Council says the early season snow dump is a timely reminder for those wanting to access the mountains or anywhere else in the district to drive to the conditions and to carry chains.
It's been a bit of a mixed bag, to be honest. We closed the Crown Range around 5:30 this morning, so we haven't had many issues up there. But with the snow falling as low as it did around the Wakatipu Basin, we've had a few crashes, a few snarl-ups on the roads. We had an instance where someone passed a grit truck as it was gritting the road and then came unstuck in front of them and then blocked up the main Shotover Bridge.
Jimmy Sygrove says earlier in the week some overly exuberant motorists ignored warnings to use chains on the Crown Range and came unstuck, causing delays and needing to be towed out. He says council staff are manning chain bays at either end of the Crown Range to ensure all motorists, even those in four-wheel drives, are carrying chains and to help put them on. So does the polar blast herald a white winter in the south? Met Service meteorologist Tui McInnes has good news for skiers, despite last night's weather system now moving to the northeast.
We do get an easing in the precipitation. Doesn't actually mean things warm up, things will stay cool, but of course in the medium-term future there's more fronts to come to bring more snow, so it's a sign of winter really, isn't it?
So while those in the north are bemoaning having to drag their winter jumpers out, down here in the south, residents are checking their bindings and waxing their boards. From Otago, for Checkpoint, Timothy Brown.
Well, let's stick with climate. Big picture, the government's been told it needs to change its approach to climate change. The final report from an expert group is out today, and it's calling for the government to figure out the risks of global warming, what they are, and to create a national plan to face them. Laura Dooney reports.
When Cyclone Fahey blew into Westport on the 1st of February, Ruth Vaianga thought she'd be safe from the rising water. But she soon spotted her granddaughter playing in a puddle on the floor.
I looked at all the floorboards and there were bubbles coming out of every bit of it. And then I grabbed her. I just thought, we got to get out of here. So I went to the front door and it was over the deck. So it was just under the front door by the time we left. And it was we waded through it. It was thigh height.
Her house is next to an estuary. It was hit by a combination of rain and a king tide. It's still not fixed, but the family will use insurance to lift the building a metre off the ground to protect it from the sea. As Ruth and her family now know, the country can expect more cyclones as the climate warms. Judy Lawrence from the Climate Change Adaptation Technical Working Group says this year was just a taste of what's to come.
Wellington, for example, had 27 days over 25 degrees. Usually we get 3. And droughts were also declared. At the same time, we experienced the devastating impacts of ex-tropical cyclone Fahey in Gita, with evacuations from homes, stranded tourists, power cuts, landslips, impassable roads and wastewater overflows.
Ms Lawrence says the government needs to be more proactive, but also needs to figure out how it will pay for the work it needs to do. Dunedin Mayor Dave Cull, who's the president of Local Government New Zealand, says the job ahead is huge and complex.
We'll need to think about how our communities respond to a national risk assessment and what the implications of that assessment will be. We need to think about the impacts of such an assessment on insurance and property values.
Mr Cull wants central government to give local councils more power to make big decisions like identifying at-risk property.
That would enable councils to act more courageously when they don't have the risk of litigation and the cost of litigation, when they do the right thing, as it were.
Climate Change Minister James Shaw says it's hard to say how long it will take to put in place what the report's suggesting.
Of the 21 recommendations, to some extent we're already moving on 7 of those. That's fully a third, so I think we're off to a pretty good start given that we only got the report yesterday. But there will be others that we've got to kind of consider and that'll take a little bit more time.
Back in Westport, Ruth Vaianga's not sure when she'll be able to move back into her home. While she hopes it doesn't flood again anytime soon, she's not worried if the house is worth less as the sea moves nearer.
That's not the reason I'm in that house. we're in there because we really love the house. We love where it is. I have drawn the birds in the estuary, you know. It's the environment I still love, and it's nature. It's irrelevant whether the house is worth anything to us now.
In the meantime, James Shaw says action on climate change is a priority, and he'll take some options on how to assess the risk to New Zealand to Cabinet soon. For Checkpoint, ko Laura Dunia ho.
Thanks, Laura, and thank you for your feedback. Lots for coming in tonight. Some of it really nice. Thank you. Brian of Ngā says, read the Fisheries. We sat down and talked to them and they promised to be good in the future. Yes, Brian, they did one rule for fishermen and another rule for others. What is the point of the report then? Our fish stocks are too precious for this wishy-washy talking. Thank you. After 6, we're going to go back to the story we began the program with, which was the share milkers who blew the whistle on animal unwellness leading to the discovery of Mycoplasma bovis. MPI are going to join us.
RNZ News at 6. Kia ora, good evening. Ko Katrina Batanaho. The Transport Minister has offered to resign for making a phone call on a domestic flight after the aircraft doors had shut. Phil Twyford says he apologises unreservedly for making the call and says it's particularly inappropriate given he's the Transport Minister. Mr Twyford says the Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern, hasn't accepted his resignation, but she stripped him of his responsibility for the Civil Aviation Authority. That role has been given to the Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter. The breach has been referred to the Civil Aviation Authority. National MP Jerry Brownlee still wants answers from Parliament Speaker as to whether he told media he heard a National MP call the Prime Minister a stupid little girl. 2 weeks ago, Trevor Mallard stopped question time to demand an apology from the national benches. Nobody owned up and the remark is not discernible on the tapes. Mr Brownlee says given Mr Mallard's the only one that heard the comment, he's the only one who could have revealed it to the media. Mr Brownlee says he wants answers.
I think he would explain to us how that term got into the media, and he could either deny that it was him, in which case we'd take him at his word, or as it stands at the moment, accept that it was him.
Jerry Brownlee. Air New Zealand has filed court proceedings against BP and Z Energy for damages caused by last year's fuel pipeline rupture between the Bastion Point refinery and Wiri in South Auckland. The rupture caused fuel shortages and hit airlines hard as the pipe carries nearly all of Auckland's aviation fuel to the airport. An investigation found the pipe was weakened after it was scraped by a digger in the 3 years leading up to the rupture. Z Energy says it's received a statement of claim from Air New Zealand Limited for $4.3 million. The company says it will defend the proceedings and refutes all claims. BP says it will also dispute the claims. The Nurses Union says a panel recommending 3 pay rises of 3% over the next year doesn't go far enough. An independent working group set up by the Prime Minister is also recommending an immediate one-off $2,000 payment to avoid strike action. The nurses' organisation spokesperson, C. Payne, says this still won't help bring them in line with teachers' pay. She says the Nurses Union will be waiting until the district health boards make an updated offer to nurses next Monday before deciding on any strike action. A rural midwife says she's spent several $1,000s on petrol in the last year and faces a bigger bill this year as fuel prices skyrocket. The cost of fuel is at a record high in some parts of the country. In Wanaka, it's hit $2.45 a litre. Jan Sharp, who works in Central Otago, spent $11,000 on petrol last year. She says the closest base hospital is a 2-hour drive away, and most clients are at least an hour away by car.
If I've got weeks where I'm not having births, then my income is much less, but I have to be able to put fuel in my car to get to do my job. So some weeks I spend more on fuel than I earn.
Jan Sharp says on average she clocks up nearly 80,000 kilometres a year doing her job. A new report on drones has found only about half of recreational users always complying with the operating rules. The survey was carried out by Airways New Zealand, which is responsible for air traffic control. Anne-Marie May reports.
More than 1,400 drone pilots responded to the survey, with 72% of commercial operators saying they always fully complied with the rules. However, just 51% of recreational users reported doing so. Airways Head of Strategy Trent Fulcher says that shows there's a clear gap in understanding and attitudes towards the rules between commercial and recreational operators. His organisation is now working towards developing a nationwide drone traffic management system. It's also looking at technologies which would allow drones to be accurately tracked once they're beyond the pilot's line of sight. This is Anne-Marie May.
North Korea has issued a sharply worded statement saying it's up to the United States whether the two countries now meet at the negotiating table or engage in a nuclear showdown. North Korea's Vice Foreign Minister says her country will neither beg the US for dialogue nor take the trouble to persuade them if they don't want to come to the table. The statement also labelled the US Vice President Mike Pence as a political dummy, slamming recent comments he made comparing North Korea to Libya. The US President Donald Trump has said he would know next week whether the summit, planned for June the 12th in Singapore, would go ahead as scheduled. It's 5 minutes past 6. Sport. The New Zealand Warriors captain Roger Tuivasa-Sheck has made himself available to play against the South Sydney Rabbitohs in the NRL this Saturday, despite his partner due to give birth on the same day. The skipper missed last week's 24-14 defeat over the Parramatta Eels in Sydney in anticipation of the birth, but says he's under no pressure to play.
There's no plan at the moment. It's just I'm just going into play and my head's playing, and when it happens, it happens. So yeah, no plan at the moment. The club in general haven't put any pressure on me. You know, they support me in what I choose to do, but in myself, I really want to play and I want to be there for the team.
Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. The New Zealand motor racing driver Brendan Hartley says this weekend's Monaco Formula One Grand Prix will be like a home event for him. The Toro Rosso driver has lived in the Principality for the last 3.5 years. He's raced on the track before in lower-level single-seaters and is excited about finally getting to race there in the world's top competition.
I actually live on the racetrack, but being allowed to attack this track in a Formula One car, I think it's a real privilege. You know, it's a special track. I think they would never commission a track like this ever again. I think definitely with the history here, it's a special one for all of us drivers.
Brendan Hartley. The Boston Celtics are just one win away from eliminating the Cleveland Cavaliers from the NBA playoffs and booking a place in the championship series. The Celtics, with Queenslander Aaron Baines elevated to the starting lineup, won 96-83 in Boston to take a 3-2 lead in the best-of-7 Eastern Conference Finals. That's the news.
Tonight on Nights, William Dart celebrates the big sound from Littleton. In New Horizons, our changing world is tackling the big issue of euthanasia, the science of dying, but also the ethics of using science to end a life. And Petula Hoki talks to me about The Russian Job, his movie about a Swede's attempts to turn around the loss-making business behind the legendary Lada.
And between 10 and 11 p.m, join me, Karen Hay, for Lately. We'll be focusing on the events of the day, both nationally and internationally, and talking to the newsmakers in an eclectic mix that covers everything from the arts to politics to live events. That's Lately with Karen Hay in the 10 p.m. hour, weeknights on RNZ National.
Met Service weather through to midnight tomorrow for Gisborne, Hawke's Bay, Wairarapa and Wellington. Fine spells, a few heavy showers mainly about the ranges, westerly gales easing overnight. For the remainder of the North Island, showers spreading northwards today, some heavy and squally with hail and isolated thunderstorms. Buller, Nelson, Westland and northern Fiordland, heavy, squally showers with hail and isolated thunderstorms. Snow above 600 metres, but heavy falls above 400 metres south of Haast, all clearing tomorrow morning. Marlborough and Canterbury fine today, apart from a few showers about the high country with snow above 600 metres. Showers spreading to the Canterbury Plains and coastal Marlborough tomorrow. Otago, Southland and southern Fiordland, showers, some heavy with hail and possible thunderstorms and snow above 500 metres. Showers retreating to coastal Southland this evening, but spreading elsewhere again tomorrow. The Chatham Islands, periods of rain, possibly heavy. It's 8 minutes past 6 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina Batten, and thanks everyone for being with us. We began the program tonight an hour ago with the share milker, Mary Poteta. Mary and her husband Sorrel were working as share milkers on the Van Leeuwen Dairy Company farm in South Canterbury when they were the first to raise the alarm about animal health. They were really concerned it wasn't mastitis. They pushed and pushed. The local vet joined them and did great work, and all of this led to MPI learning about the presence of Mycoplasma bovis in this country. Almost a year on, Mary and her husband are homeless effectively. They're living out of a caravan in a car in Australia where they're looking for work, and still out of pocket after the herd they were milking was culled.
We're in Victoria, in Sale, in Australia. We had to get off the farm and we got a letter saying that we must vacate the farm by April. So by March, we had a job offer here in Australia, because in New Zealand, that time of the year, you don't find a job. For share milkers, you don't find jobs in the middle of March. And since then, I bought a caravan on my credit card. I bought a car on my credit card, and we just went for interviews. Travelled from Western Australia to Victoria just for interviews. We just went for interviews. And I can say we did find a job, a position, but it only starts the end of June.
I'm just reading in the New Zealand Herald, Mr. Van Leeuwen talking about how devastating it's been for the Van Leeuwen Dairy Group. He's quoted as saying, "We are struggling at the moment because we notified the disease we are eligible for compensation, but it's a battle, it's not coming through." When it does come through, if it hasn't already, would you expect that some of it would be shared with you?
Well, yes, of course. 22% of the milk production that we would have done must come to us.
Have you received any of that compensation? Have you received what you believe you are entitled to?
Nothing. John, nothing. They're going to have to, if NPR doesn't pay up soon, I'll have to declare myself bankrupt.
So that is Mary Poteta talking to us. We screened that interview at length earlier in the program. That's available online. We're delighted to say Jeff Gwynn is MPI's Director of Response and Readiness, and Jeff joins us now. Second time in 2 days you've been on Checkpoint, Jeff, and we're very grateful for your availability. Where are you at? Well, not you, but where is MPI at with compensation for the Potetas?
Look, firstly, John, I do want to reinforce the fact that they did everything right, and you know, they were the ones that notified us of the disease. And look, I'm acutely aware of their circumstances. Look, my view, we've had the claims for some 3 or 4 months, and it has taken too long, and I accept accountability for that. We have paid some 20% of what they've claimed, but there's 80% outstanding. So you can take my assurance I'm working as hard as I can to get the rest paid as soon as possible. But there are some complexities around their claim.
And Jeff, are you there? What are the complexities?
Yeah, sorry. The complexities are their claim is principally around projected losses in milk production, and clearly with fluctuating production levels and milk solid prices fluctuate as well, that makes it somewhat problematic. But they're also in a contractual relationship with a previous employer, which means there are some claims that are intertwined.
Yeah, and I can understand why that is complex. Have you paid the previous employer, the Van Leeuwens, have you paid any of the compensation they are eligible for to them?
We've paid large amounts. I can't discuss individual claims. What I can tell you is we've paid large sums of money, but there are simplistic claims as well, or simpler claims, which are around obviously the culling of animals, which is a far simpler formula. You, in essence, have a valuation done.
Absolutely.
You cull the animal, and that's quite a simplistic process. The Mary and Sorrel are a more difficult situation because their claims are substantially more complex than that.
Okay, but the good news for them is you acknowledge it's taken too long, and you are going to do something about it to facilitate the appropriate payment as soon as possible.
That's what I intend to do, John, and as I said, I take accountability for the delays to date. We are working as hard as we can, but it has taken longer than I would have liked.
It's a perverse outcome, isn't it? Because they did great work. As you said at the beginning of this interview, they did everything right, and they pushed and pushed. At first, it was thought it was mastitis. It wasn't. They went back. They couldn't have behaved better as whistleblowers. And perversely, they have been financially punished for this. They've lost their livelihood. They've lost their home. They are now trying to scrape together a living in Australia. So is there a way we can better protect whistleblowers in this situation?
Well, I think there's two parts to it, John. I mean, obviously we will pay compensation for verifiable loss as a result of what we have done under the Biosecurity Act. I think some of the challenges faced by people in Mary and Sorrel's position is their relationships with their employers as well. And unfortunately, that's an area MPI can't influence to any great extent.
One final question. You may not want to answer it, but Gypsy Day, June 1st, which is a week tomorrow. And we've had people on Checkpoint last week, and it was fascinating for me as a townie, because I wonder why the hell do so many cows move at the beginning of winter? Well, they move because they're going for winter feed, right? Beet fodder, swedes, root crops. So you can't stop them from moving, because if you do, they won't eat. And there are animal welfare concerns there. But boy, oh boy, this is a disastrous time to have Gypsy Day, isn't it, with Mycoplasma bovis about. Is this part of MPI's response, or is this what the government's looking at on Monday?
Well, I think, John, you've got to keep this in context. There's some 11,670 dairy farms throughout New Zealand. We have regulatory controls on a little under 300 of them. So in the grand scheme of things, that is not a huge amount. So we believe by having those locked under regulatory control, we've mitigated the risk to its lowest level. So there should be a level of confidence for farmers, as long as they apply some simple precautions, that they can trust movements from farms that aren't under regulatory control.
How many farms have you got under regulatory control now?
Yeah, it's a little under 300.
Okay, right. Thank you so much.
Again, it's in the context of nearly 12,000 dairy farms.
Just one final question, because I guess Mary will be listening to this. When do you think the pot eaters, or Mary and Sarah, will get their money?
Look, I would love to give her a date, but I can't do that. All I can tell her is I am working my hardest to get that claim out the door. Look, I'll be honest with you, John, this is the thing I lose sleep about in my job. I understand, we're trying to do the right thing by the national herd and protect New Zealand, but there's always those at the sharp end of our decisions, and it's those that I worry about the most. So, Mary and Sorrel, if you are listening, I would take a personal interest in your claim and do everything I can to progress it.
Jeff Gwynn, who is the Head of Readiness and Response for MPI, joining us live on the phone there. We really appreciate it. The Transport Minister has been stripped of his responsibility for the Civil Aviation Authority after making a phone call on a domestic flight after the aircraft doors had shut. Phil Twyford offered to resign over the call, which he says lasted about a minute, but says Jacinda Ardern decided to relieve him of his civil aviation responsibilities instead. That role has been given to the Associate Transport Minister, Julianne Genter. Phil Twyford spoke to reporters at Parliament a short time ago.
It's particularly inappropriate for a Minister of Transport to do that. So today I informed the Prime Minister of this matter and offered my resignation. She declined that, but she has chosen to transfer my responsibilities for the Civil Aviation Authority to Associate Minister Julianne Genter.
So you'll stay on as Transport?
What were you thinking?
I made a mistake, and I clearly wasn't thinking straight at the time, and I recognised that. It was unacceptable. And I apologise unreservedly.
Who was the call to?
It was to one of my staff.
And why was it so important that you make it after the doors closed?
Well, that's a good question, and I clearly at the time thought it was an important matter, but in hindsight it doesn't excuse or justify breaking the rules.
How did it play out? Did someone out you, or did someone report it? Can you just let us know that?
Yeah, I received, earlier today, I received a written parliamentary question from the Honourable Judith Collins about it.
So she had seen you making the call, had she?
I don't know, you'd have to ask her.
Why didn't you come out with it earlier then and just make mea culpa?
Yeah, so I wasn't thinking properly at the time about it, otherwise I wouldn't have done it. And I hadn't given it a moment's thought until today.
Did you get noticed or told off by a flight attendant at the time?
No.
Is it something you've done before?
It's certainly not my habit to do this, and it's very clear that it's a breach of the rules and unacceptable. And I'm not aware of ever having done it before.
How did it feel tendering your resignation?
That's not something that any minister wants to do.
How did the Prime Minister react?
She expressed her disappointment, and we discussed it, and she said that it would be the appropriate thing to transfer my responsibilities for civil aviation to the Associate Minister.
And when you went in there, were you full well expecting that perhaps transport could be taken off you, that perhaps there could be further punitive measures?
To be honest, I hadn't considered that. Look, we serve at the pleasure of the Prime Minister, and I accept her decision.
How long was the phone call? How long was the phone call?
Approximately a minute.
Do you see this as more or less serious than Jerry Brownlee's security gate infringement?
I wouldn't want to put it in a hierarchy. I mean, I think it's a similar breach of the rules, and for a Transport Minister, it's particularly unacceptable.
Do you accept that you could be prosecuted for this? So Jerry Brownlee was fined $2,000. John Banks, speaking on a plane at one other stage, he went through the court system. Do you expect any further action?
So it's a breach of the civil aviation rules, and I wrote to the Director of Civil Aviation today. I wrote in my capacity as a Member of Parliament and drew this matter to his attention. And I fully expect that the authority will take whatever action it deems necessary.
Phil Twyford talking to reporters at Parliament a short time ago, 19 minutes past 6. 40 years ago tomorrow, Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei was forcibly evicted from Takaparawhau, or Bastion Point, in Auckland, Tamaki Makaurau, a move that's been described as a defining moment in New Zealand history. Police and army personnel were called in to remove more than 200 people who were occupying Bastion Point in protest at the government's plans for a housing development on Ngāti Whātua reserve land. The occupation became one of the defining moments in the battle for Māori land rights. Te Manu Kōrehi reporter John Boynton has more.
In 1975, Dame Whina Cooper led marches to Parliament to protest the loss of Māori land. Their catch cry was "Not one more acre." That put the fight for Māori land squarely in the mainstream spotlight. The most defining image of this battle was the 506-day occupation of Bastion Point, which ended with the eviction of protesters on May the 25th, 1978. The Crown showed military precision in their takedown of the occupation. On the orders of then Prime Minister Robert Muldoon, more than 800 police officers marched up to Bastion Point to forcibly remove protesters and destroy their makeshift camp. The Crown's position was clear, as can be heard by George McMillan, who was the Commissioner of Crown Lands.
This place is Crown Lands. I have the lawful authority and duty to prevent unlawful trespassing or intrusion upon or occupation of this place.
Leading the occupation was Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei leader Joe Hawke. In January 1977, after the government announced a housing development on former Ngāti Whātua reserve land, the occupation began. Joe Hawke talked to Māori broadcaster Whai Ngata about the importance of fighting for Māori land.
So I believe that this is a beginning of where Māori people can get courage, can get knowledge and determination to make their genuine grievances heard.
Joe's daughter Sharon Hawke was 16 years old at the time of the occupation and can recall the tension leading up to the eviction.
We had a month of false alarms of them coming, so that was Muldoon's tactic to sort of keep us on edge, really, that they were coming in and then they wouldn't come in, and so it's to tire people out.
Sharon Hawke remembers it was a clear wintry day on May the 25th.
There was a lot of singing, there was a lot of reinforcement that this was a non-violent, passive protest and that we were here to be strong, stay staunch to that kaupapa of non-violence.
And she was shocked at the military presence.
It was very disturbing, the numbers and the military sort of operation, because there was also helicopters from the New Zealand Army, Air Force. There was a ship out in the harbour, a Navy vessel. Now, those things aren't, there to go fishing. They're there to be a threat.
Sharon was arrested and taken to the police cells and returned later that day to find the camp cleared out.
We were grieving the loss of the battle. That's how it felt. The show of force was never expected. So we stayed on the marae for a few months to sort of recalibrate what the action was to be from there on.
Her brother Taiaha Hawke was sent by his parents to St Stephen's Māori boarding school in Bombay before the evictions.
1978, 25th of May, 40 years ago, sort of hearing it on the radio in the morning and not really understanding what was happening as a 13-year-old. So yeah, things were pretty tough.
In 1982, Taiaha Hawke would experience being removed himself. After an occupation which lasted 24 hours, the Crown evicted protesters once again from Bastion Point.
These two large floodlights that had a policeman and an Alsatian on either side of them, and it was straight out of a Nazi war movie. That just scared the hell out of me.
Taiaha Hawke says this month's protest at Parliament against the treaty settlement process revealed the frustration of Māori having to continually compromise with the Crown.
We just want what other New Zealanders want. We want to be happy. We want to be safe. We want to build a future for our children. We do want to do it our way. You know, don't let Bastion Point be repeated again.
The Bastion Point occupation was the catalyst for the establishment of the Waitangi Tribunal and the claims process. The first results of the Ngāti Whātua claim was the 1991 Ōrākei Act, which saw some land returned. Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei is now the third biggest landowner in Auckland CBD, owning 28 hectares of prime city real estate. Being able to own land, Sharon Hawke says, is vital for future generations.
Māori are nothing without land. We don't have mana without land. And so getting the land back is about reviving that mana.
She says many of those who fought for their land may have passed on, but the fight will continue.
When people say let's celebrate, okay, let's celebrate the fact that we remain staunch, we remain true to the kaupapa, and yes, we have some of our land back.
Commemorations for the 40th anniversary begin tomorrow with a dawn ceremony at Bastion Point. Mo te hōtaka o te ahi pōnei, ko John Boynton aho.
It's 25 minutes past 6. It's Pacific Music Awards night. They have been held as a separate event to the New Zealand Music Awards since 2005. In an effort to acknowledge the success of Pacific artists, celebrate and promote excellence in Pacific music and encourage young Pacific musicians to aspire to a higher level of achievement. It's also a night of great celebration. Music 101 host Alex Bean joins us now from the Manukau Events Centre ahead of tonight's ceremony, looking very handsome. Alex, what are we expecting tonight?
Kia ora, John. Malola lei. Well, I tell you what, it's going to be hard to top last year's event. This time last year, and it was my first time at the Pacific Music Awards here at the Manukau Event Centre, these aisles here were filled with children singing and dancing, reenacting the Moana soundtrack and movie in one of the most extravagant and delightful ways. And that was one of the huge success stories of the 2017 Pacific Music Awards. And the rest of the world just caught up. Just 2 days ago, the Moana soundtrack won 2 awards at the Billboard Music Awards. But tonight will be very, very exciting. We've got Noah Slee, who is a Berlin-based New Zealand performer who's nominated for 4 awards. He'll be performing tonight, as well as Razé, who made an amazing video at RNZ yesterday. She's a great performer. And of course the 12-year-old who has captured the hearts and minds of so many New Zealanders. General Fire will be performing his huge hit, Here to Stay.
Alex, do you think the success of the Moana soundtrack will have a wider impact for Pacific music?
I think it quite possibly will. Already at the moment here in New Zealand, we're seeing a huge revival or renaissance in Pacific music. You've got bands like Tomorrow People, who released a single last year that they put in English, Te Reo Māori and Samoan, and it charted incredibly well. They're getting radio play for it. Internationally, the impact that these Disney soundtracks have on young minds cannot be underestimated. I wouldn't be surprised if in 10 years we started hearing a few more log drums in R&B or hip-hop. Here's a man who may have a perspective on it, Reverend Mua Strixon-Pua, who is the chair of the Pacific Music Awards Committee. Reverend, tell me about the growth of these awards in their 14 years.
What we've seen is the development of Pacific music, the celebration, the honouring, the tie of our communities, our culture, our language, the tie-in also with tonight's theme of fire, family, faith, and also the continuation of professional development, the business aspect, also the academic, and also the cultural and the spiritual. So it's a coming together to celebrate, to honour our elders. 50 years of music from Reverend Pateru to a 12-year-old superstar who last year did his first award, did his first speech, and told us, this is Pacifica, we're here, we're alive, and we are just so excited to be sharing great music.
It's so true. The Lifetime Achievement Award, of course, going to Puni Lava'a and General Fire. So we've got a huge range of artists. Do you agree with me, Reverend, that there is a real strength and a thriving community here in Pacific music at the moment in New Zealand?
We've always had a strong sense of that. We've always had a strong sense and awareness too that we're beginning to move into new areas and make contributions to opera, to all these new fields that we believe are just as classic of with a beautiful Polynesian touch. And I think Aotearoa deserves to take credit for allowing the melting pot, the musical journeys of putting together, and then let's see what happens with our amazing society that says our music is who we are. And that's what we're celebrating tonight.
One great big melting pot. Will you be opening the ceremony again with a prayer?
Oh, definitely. I'm looking forward to it.
I look forward to it, Reverend. Thank you so much. The Pacific Music Awards are taking place at the Manukau Event Centre. There's actually still time to come down if you can brave the rain and the southern motorway. It'll be a wonderful evening, and we'll have details of all the winners on Lately tonight, and there'll be a report package on Morning Report tomorrow, John.
Fantastic. Thanks, Alex. Lovely to see Mua Strixon-Pua, whose boy Feletti, I think, was a founding member of Nesian Mystic. A truly fantastic band. What, in the early 21st century, late 20th century? Anyway, wonderful Auckland music. That's it for the show tonight. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We really appreciate your company, and we will be back tomorrow night at 5.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. The Transport Minister, Phil Twyford, is sanctioned for making a phone call on a domestic flight after the doors had been shut. Jerry Brownlee keeps up the pressure on Trevor Mallard over whether he revealed the sexist remark he heard in Parliament about the Prime Minister. Air New Zealand sues BP and Z Energy for damages caused by last year's fuel pipeline rupture. Fuel prices are now so high that some weeks they're costing a rural midwife more than she earns. The Ministry for Primary Industries says compensation for Mycoplasma bovis is taking too long to pay out. And just half of all recreational drone operators are complying with the rules. Our next news and weather is at 7.
I know about euthanasia.
It's one of those sticky moral topics.
I wasn't sure what I was really signing up for.
The issue is genuinely very difficult.
The views of people who are